This next panel is going to be on a subject matter that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a former community organizer, former campaign manager, and here in Oakland, we're lucky enough to have psychedelics and magic mushrooms decriminalized. This panel, yes, you can go clap it up for that. This panel is going to include a lot of the trailblazers and activists that have helped pave the way. I could not be more thrilled to have these people up here to talk, and if you're still around and you have questions, I would encourage you to pull all of them aside. Everybody's personable. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then y'all give them a big hand at the very end, because I know that you would clap for me longer than everybody else, and I don't want anybody else to feel slighted. So first, to my left, we have Larry Norris of Decriminalize Nature. Not yet, hold the clap, hold the clap. Second, we have Mudu Baki from Decriminalize Nature, also Detroit Psychedelic Society. Third, we have the man that brought us all here today. We have Pastor Dave Hodges. And last but absolutely not least, we have the homie Nara Dahlbacka, policy expert and activist. And I don't think I've introduced myself yet. My name is Reggie Harris from Oakland High Fae. I'd like to just start by letting you guys give your 1 minute elevator pitch about who you are, and then we'll get straight into the questions. So Larry, if you would start.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, great, okay. Hello everybody, thank you all for being here. My name is Larry Norris. I am the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature. I really help out on the national level, helping organize cities all across the US to pass similar policy that passed here in Oakland in 2019. As another thing I do, I also work with entheogenic or psychedelic integration and education through a nonprofit called ERIE, which we started in California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco in 2011. So we've been doing integration circles for a while. If you'd like to talk about experiences, I love to do that as well. It's kind of fun. So yeah, if you want to see more, I'll be out at a table over there, Decriminalize Nature and ERIE table, and I'd love to chat with you. Thank you.
And y'all, this is one of the founders of Decriminalize Nature. When we talk about the people who started this shit out and started decriminalized localities, this is the guy. So he's local famous, but I fuck with him. So y'all got a celebrity here. Mudu Baki.
Greetings, family. I am Mudu Baki out of Detroit. I am with Decriminalize Nature National, also with the Detroit Psychedelic Society. Been working with Decriminalize Nature National since about 2020 as we work to organize behind several cities in Michigan. Ann Arbor was my starting point. Then eventually working to get the decriminalization of Detroit. And so it's been a beautiful effort. We had a voter referendum. And so out of that, the work we've been doing for years came the Detroit Psychedelic Society, which informally existed, but it's an official organization now. So it's such a pleasure to be here.
This man Mudu here is so impressive. Put your hand in the air if you know who Baba Kalindi is. So Mudu right here was a student who studied from the living, breathing Baba Kalindi, and quite frankly, there's not a thing that Mudu doesn't know something about. This motherfucker's smart as hell. Dave Hodges.
I got to second that about Mudu. I mean, not to talk him up too much, but he's pretty awesome. Everybody probably knows me at this point, but I think what's relevant right now is that Reggie and I had worked together to file the Cognitive Freedom Initiative, is what we first called it, and then it became the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative. Unfortunately, it's not going to make it for 2024, but we are going to work again to try to see something happen in 2026. But I'm excited to have this discussion with everybody, and I really hope that we can actually make some form of access available to everybody in 2026.
If you guys haven't had a chance to check out the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative, I encourage you to. It's on the internet. There's a website. But not only, the good thing about the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative is not only does it legalize or decriminalize mushrooms, but DMT, LSD, MDMA, a bunch of other psychedelics too, with a common goal to keep people from having to go to jail. So check it out.
I think we have a image with a QR code on it where people could scan it if they can switch you guys can switch the image to the next one. But we'll get it later.
And Nara, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, Nara Dahlbacka. I am from Oakland originally. I live up in Lake County now, so up north in wine and weed country. I've been working in the policy front. Actually grew up in politics in the East Bay, so pretty much my whole life, but been working on the plant medicine side for about 10 years now.
Thank you, Nara. So I want to start the question now, and Larry, I'll start with you. Larry, I want to start out with you. You've been involved in decriminalizing, what, 13, 14 cities at this point? Many more than 14. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? Because even though these cities are oftentimes in different states, you guys have a base level formula that seems to be transferable. Can you talk to people a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think there's 28 cities now that have passed. I think a handful of them were with base staters in Massachusetts, and then everything else was people that we've talked to, supported, gave the training to, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been really powerful. I think that's really the key. I didn't know anything about policy before I started doing this process, and everyone tells me, oh, I don't know anything about policy, how could I do this, right? But it's not hard, and it's our responsibility to protect consciousness, right? It's our responsibility to go in and talk to the city council members. It's our responsibility to change it. We can't wait for people who have other agendas to do it. So encouraging people to say, hey, you know what? I have a community here. I can gather some folks together. You don't need money. Go pitch it to the city council. We've done this now so many times that we have a very nice little flow chart. It's really, really easy now. It's just like, do this thing, check out this thing. I like, although city council members like to think they're having independent thoughts and ideas, when you see them across the range of the U.S., you realize they're asking the exact same questions over and over again, right? So you just got to sort of help people respond to those questions, respond to those concerns or those fears or that stigma that they've had or that misinformation they've been dealing with for a while. So I think just this year alone, we're projecting 8 to 10 cities more will pass. We're really wanting to push hard in California right now. Nara will talk about this a little bit later, but obviously, the decrim was taken out of the statewide bill in the last round, which was watered down anyway, but there's no decrim there. But this new iteration doesn't have it at all. So we really want to push hard in California so we can have more cities to say, hey, you know what, decrim is important. We are ready for decrim. I've heard people in other states say, oh, well, California shows that decrim, people aren't ready for decrim. It's like, no, one person said that. Yeah. It went through 10 committees before it got there, right? And so this is really a critical point to think about is we can keep pushing on the city level, gather your community. There's so many people, a lot of times I see a situation where sometimes a city council member is waiting to be asked, right? They're just like, oh, great. Wow, somebody's finally, I can't do this myself, but now I have 3 or 4 people. And there's so many allies in the city council or a city manager or a staff member or something else that just don't talk about it. But then all of a sudden you're behind closed doors and like, oh yeah, maybe I've had an experience, or I know somebody has helped, had some transformation or a spiritual experience or what have you. So really finding an opportunity to connect with the local community is important. Finding an opportunity to engage with the city council is important. And we have all the tools. We do one orientation once a month. We have a national meeting. We have a pretty strong team that's building right now. I think there's about 40 new teams just in this first quarter that have started up again. I might have said that already, but I'll say it again. So all of you can be additions to that. So reach out to me. Again, I'm out there. This is really important. It's about growing your own. It's about gathering your own. It's about sharing in community-based ceremony and practice, culturally relevant settings, people that you know, that you can connect with. This is really critical. We want to make sure that we always have access to the plants and mushrooms.
Thank you for that. I love, so we're blessed, those of you that live here in Oakland, because like Larry said, our city council people are open to talking to us. They're open to receiving these ideas. At the last Oakland conference, we had city councilors there, mushrooms all on the table, chocolates everywhere, and she thought it was great, And so being a presence and advocating for yourself and your community in front of these decision makers, it wasn't even a public vote here in Oakland, was it? It was a city council resolution. So, that's how much power these people have sometimes. I wanted to connect the question, though, to, for you, Nara, when we're talking about Senate Bill 1012, the bill that's in front of the legislature right now here in the state of California. 2 things. I'd like for you to talk, when Larry said it doesn't include decrim, I want you to just tell folks who might not understand the difference between what decrim and legalization is, and then talk specifically about, I guess, what 1012 is and how it's different than SB 58, please.
Okay, sure. All right, so I've been working various iterations of state bills for a little over 3 years now. We had SB 519, SB 58, and now SB 1012. They were all introduced by Senator Scott Wiener out of San Francisco. San Francisco, another decrim city, thanks to the activism here. SB 519 and SB 58 both had decrim elements. I guess that's where I get to rewind and we talk about decriminalization versus legalization. Individual cities aren't able to actually decriminalize. What they're able to do is pass a lowest law enforcement priority, which is really important, but it's as far as a city can go. The state's the one that can actually go in and remove the penal code that says that these substances, these plants, are against the law to possess, to consume, to grow, to share, right? And removing that penal code is the way that we get to say, hey, you're able to carry a certain amount on you and not be subject to arrest, not be subject to issues if you have a stalking or a domestic violence situation, you're worried about losing your kids or somebody's gonna turn you in for trying to heal yourself, right? And that it's really, really important to have decrim. Last year, we used to have a share provision. In 519, there was a sharing provision in addition to a provision that said that the medicine holder themselves was able to carry the aggregate amount of the plants times the number of people that were in the ceremony with them. That came out of 58 last year, and it became just simple, small amount of personal possession that was decriminalized, and we got that through 6 policy committees, so it was double referred, which is often a way to kill a bill, is to send it to 2 policy committees. But we got through 6 policy committees last year in both houses of the legislature, after having done the same thing the year before and then getting stopped in appropriations and killed in appropriations, which is the black box where bills go to get murdered. At the last minute, we were able to get it through appropriations last year. They did add a provision in there that said we want to have a study session to look at therapeutic, legal, regulated use, which is the difference between legalization and decriminalization. And it landed on the governor's desk, and it was unfortunately vetoed. It was vetoed with a note that said, I believe that there are really important substances, there's really important research, that psychedelics do seem to be helping people a lot, but I don't want to see decriminalization before there are guardrails in place or a therapeutic framework in place. And so send me a bill that's therapeutic use only, and we can talk. So that is the bill that Senator Wiener put together this year, even though personally he would like to see, and I think he's been really public about this, so I don't think I'm outing him on this, he said he would be in favor of decriminalization of all drugs, and I think that's something that I believe in too. But that's not the bill that we get this year. This year we get a therapeutic regulatory framework bill. And that bill is going to go to its first policy committee, business and professions, on April 9th. And what I'm hoping is that there are a couple carve-outs in that bill that say if your local jurisdiction goes further than this bill will not impede those local and that's why the work that Larry's doing is so important, and why we have to protect that little section of the bill, because that means that local jurisdictions around the state can say, we want decrim, and we want to see it now, and we're going to pass we're going to go as far as we can go on the local level until you're willing to act on the state level.
Nara, I just got a question for you about that. So I hate to admit that I have not read the bill, which...
It's a long one this time.
Yeah, well, I tell everybody you really need to read the bills that you're supporting and voting in. That's the most important lesson from legalization in California, is you need to really understand and don't pass the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But my understanding was what Scott Wiener is working on is a research, not therapeutic. Is there something that would allow people to access it through therapy, or
Yes.
is it just studies?
It's well, what it sets up is similar to what they did in Colorado and in Oregon, although it sets up a like a blue ribbon task force that would develop regulations to license their psychedelic facilitators. So and that's why it's going to business and professions this time instead of health.
I think that's great. I mean, we obviously need more than that, but and hopefully it stays at least at that level, because that's one of the unfortunate things about going through the political process, is things get watered down and watered down and watered down, and that's what Larry was mentioning earlier. We see something that's pretty good, and by the time it actually ends up on the desk, it's not good enough, or
Barely
it takes
supportable.
barely something we even want to support, and it got vetoed anyway. So you know, it's good to hear at least there's some form of somebody being able to access it, and it's not just pure science.
No, it's not just pure research. There is a research component, and there's also a fair bit of money allocated for education, and I think that's going to be really important, and that's where some of the folks that opposed the last two bills are in favor of this one, because they really wanted to see some additional education in there. There is also one other carve-out that I want to mention, which is a protection for religious and spiritual use. So that exists in the bill. So those are two things that we have to protect. They said we're not going to interfere with federal law, basically, that says that you can practice your religion.
Hey, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great. We'll see what it ends up being. It's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So while we got you on the mic, Dave, two questions for you. So now that we've gone through, we've talked a little bit about the work that Decriminalize Nature has done. We've talked about what's currently on deck for the state of California. I want to take half a step back and say that, and mention that we're living in a place that's decrim. Like Oakland is decriminalized, but
Lowest priority.
But a few years
And
ago,
defunding.
And they still local PD raided me.
So I'm getting there. You'll beat me to the punch. So in a decriminalized world, the church got raided. I'm curious to know. I kind of understand how it happened, but for the audience, can you please explain how that happened? Can you talk just briefly about what happened, and then I want to talk about cognitive freedom or psychedelic wellness and healing initiative.
Yeah, I'll make it brief, but there's a long, fun story. But the long and short of it is the war on drugs is really focused around money. The goal of the cops is to take the money from drug dealers. That's how they make their money. That's how they fund getting things like all this horrible training that they get, and these military armaments and all this shit.
Asset forfeiture.
Yeah,
like
that is what I'm talking about. So they came in to try to take our money, and they got a bunch of sacrament. They cut open one of our safes. It was Oakland PD. Now the guy on it is no longer with Oakland PD, thankfully. And I like to think that has something to do with how bad he did it, but it was literally a illegal warrant. The crimes they accused us of doing don't even exist in California anymore. So it was the worst case scenario from them trying to prosecute us, but they get away with so much. You got to understand how much power they have when they call you a drug dealer. So the fact is, we never got any criminal charges, but they knocked down the doors, they cut open the safes, and what eventually got them to leave was me saying, we have one safe in here that is a jeweler's safe rated for 8 hours for a professional safecracker. You know what you're doing, you have all the tools, best case scenario, you're taking 8 hours to get into that. I only had some old paperwork file in there, and I had been kicking myself for not having more valuable things in there for a long time because it was an expensive safe, but they insisted on getting into that safe before they left. And I managed to negotiate with the cops of, I'll let you into the 8 hour safe if you pack your bags and leave. And when they opened the 8-hour safe and saw the old paperwork, they were pissed off, threw it on the floor, but nobody wanted to be there, so they left. But that's the reality, you know, and the reality of the law in a place where it's lowest priority, priority is not defined. Like a priority could be, I stubbed my toe, now I want to go mess with somebody. It really can be that loose. It doesn't have to be any sort of legally defined actual reason. And that's conflicting with state law. So it's like, you know, you're a construction worker who operates cranes, and they're trying to say, well, you know, you don't have to operate cranes, but that's your job to operate the cranes. So it's your lowest priority to operate the cranes, but there's a job you have to do. The cops have a job to enforce the drug laws. Now, whether or not they did the right thing in raiding us is a whole nother thing, but their job is literally to enforce the drug laws. So lowest priority means it's the lowest priority not to do your job. And there's a big conflict there, and there's even a potential, like if a cop actually was doing something where they caught a major felony, but the city's saying lowest priority, there becomes a legal conflict that hasn't been tested in court yet. But there's nothing good about it. It's great that it should be their lowest priority and that people are safer than they ever could be. Somebody with a small amount is totally safe, but there's no good access in lowest priority. What we really need, and this gets into the thing that we're trying to do with the Psychedelic Health and Wellness Initiative, is provide ways for people to have safe access. And this gets into what Gavin has been talking about and what Larry has been doing, and what we're trying to do is combine everything good into an initiative that we can all agree on, so we can have access in a way that everybody gets helped, and people can make money and have businesses and create a new economy at the same time. But the key is to understand the economy we're trying to create, how it should exist, and make sure that everybody is safe in it. So one of the big things that we did, which was a change from what Reggie and I were first talking about, but really fits into what Gavin was talking about, is psychedelics for medical access, like medical cannabis was. So we're not saying you necessarily have, we're actually not saying you need a prescription, you need a recommendation from a doctor. But as a guardrail, if I could have everybody just spend 15 minutes with a doctor before doing psychedelics, it would be a great thing. You know, for the most part, they're really safe, but there's some things you should know. The biggest one, which is something a doctor could instantly tell you, if you've had a heart transplant or a transplanted organ, there's a really interesting thing where your body can reject your heart. So if you've had a heart transplant, do not do psilocybin, probably don't do any psychedelics, but going and seeing a doctor for a second and them running you through anything that could be health concerns and preparing you to actually use them is a great idea. That's how we keep people safe. That's what we need to do.
That's also how we got the carve out for churches in the bill, was in conversations with the author's office, saying some of the best preparation and best, you know, pre-integration that I've seen around, even beyond some of the therapists and things that are already doing this work underground, is in the churches. And it's the forms and the intake and all of that. The churches are doing this already to protect their congregants. And so it's already in place.
And I think this is what's kind of been interesting and ironic too, because, well, yes, deprioritize, defund. How many thousands of more people are now growing mushrooms without any worries in Oakland, you know? So there's these moments in time that, like, it's difficult, but ironically, it's the churches that are getting tagged. You got tagged, Detroit got tagged, there's a Portland, I think, you know, one in Denver. Like, it's always the churches that people are going over, you know? So it's this interesting, it should be a federal issue anyway, right? Because that's where the protection comes from, the RFRA comes from, right? So I don't know, you want to speak to that a little more?
Well, I was interested, as this has developed, there's been certain caveats with the decriminalization model that spoke to no funding as well. So it's interesting for those cities. I don't know if we have any case studies to see how that operated, but you know, that adds extra weight as well, where no funds are allocated toward the enforcement of a low priority issue. Yeah. So I like that provision as well because, you know, most cities are, the first concern is fiscal. So then when you start talking about spending extra funds, that's when they get tight. You know, so
that's
I like
actually one of the things that they mentioned about the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative is that it would save money to the state of California on enforcement. You know, one of the first things they said. I actually have, Nara, you look like you want to say something. I got a follow-up for Dave, and then I got one for Mudu.
Yeah, I think I had a response on it, but now I don't remember. But that was 58. 58's first version was actually we left out all of the study groups and all of that stuff in the very first version of 58, which was a beautiful bill. That first introduced version of 58. And it said, because California is in a fiscal crisis right now, it said this is going to save the state money. And that was really helpful for us last year.
Go ahead.
Real quick on this. But this bill sounds like it will cost a lot more money. So how are they balancing that?
Cost of money. It's gonna be a little bit more of a lift.
Because especially with Oregon, after 2 years, I think they have no funds anymore for their program. So it's like, how did that support itself? I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit? Sorry.
No, you're good. Let's
you know, I'm not as familiar with exactly what the funding mechanism is. I know that most of the funding would be is actually around supporting the education side, and so I think that's you know, hopefully not a huge price tag. But it does have a price tag. 58 and 519 both had a price tag as well. So once in their final form, and they did, and 58 did at least make it through appropriations.
So one of the problems with what's been going on, even with the Senate bills and everything, and this funding, they've got to carve out existing funding, and that's why we really need to be talking about some sort of industry of sorts, and if it's a medical industry or whatever, but the funding is there. We just need to create a regulated system that can fund the education and fund what the state needs to be doing. You know, when you're talking about what could be passed through a city council, there's limitations. What you could pass through a initiative at a city level, which is actually something that Mudu has direct experience doing. Larry in Oakland was through the city council themselves, and they put the law in place. In Detroit, they actually had to go to the voters and have the voters vote on it, which is a whole nother process. But there's what you can do at a local level through the voters, and then there's what you can do at a state level through the voters. And it gets complicated when you talk about different states and the differences, and not every states have this. But in California, we have both initiatives and referendums at a local and a state level. I don't need to get into the difference of the two, but what we're doing is an initiative to create a market that can fund some of these things too. Because as long as everybody's making money, and you're not talking about a situation where, unfortunately, we have in legal cannabis in California, where the industry itself is just, it's impossible to run the business because of all the fines and regulations and the way they're doing it. The people who wrote those laws didn't understand how the law would actually work. So it's really important we understand how the law can work, and we want everybody's feedback on it. But we need to create a market where you provide the access, you provide the education, you allow people to open businesses. If it's anything from a therapy center to a retreat to anything you could possibly imagine, as long as it's done safely, you should be able to do it.
So one of the things that I kept hearing from almost everybody here was about education. I'm going to ask the audience a quick question, and you can respond by putting your hands up. So by show of hands, how many people in the audience have eaten psychedelic mushrooms? Put your hand up. All right, leave your hand up. Leave your hands up. Leave your hand up if you had somebody show you how to take those mushrooms for the first time. Yeah. Now, of the people who put your hands down, you didn't have anybody, you can all put your hands down now, but of the people who put your hands down, you didn't have anybody show you. Do you wish that you had somebody tell you a thing or two about mushrooms before you got into it? I did too. So, Dave, I heard you mention in the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative that there was a component in there that says you have to get a recommendation from a doctor. I've heard people publicly say, well, I don't want to do a medicalized model. Can you talk a little bit about your response to people that say that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a big difference between what people think of as a medicalized model and what we had in medical cannabis in California. The difference is, if you're talking a medical model, you're talking about doctors who are giving prescriptions and a whole set of processes that has to go through the FDA and the medical boards, and you're talking about a lot of science, and that's good, but we're not there yet, and it's going to be a long time before we're really there. Honestly, I would love to see science applied to this fucking really high-dose breakthrough work to really understand other things, but that's kind of a side point. You know, getting to the point where we have people know what they're doing and they have access to it and everything's being funded is the biggest problem. So when it comes to what we need to do next, it's agree on a law that's going to work and make sure that everybody understands what they're doing, which is easier said than done.
So would you say it's more of like a medical checkup model than a medical model?
Yeah, it's so recommendations are not prescriptions. Right, a recommendation is, well, I recommend you play golf. I think you should. Yeah,
It protects the doctor too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that was
the doctor's not prescribing anything. It's just saying, hey, I recommend you try this. Now, why?
It's like our cannabis cards used to be, right?
Exactly. So the difference between the recommendation and the prescription is the difference between the FDA and all these regulations and a system where we just have access to it and we have some more information. Because we need, to me, getting to the point where we really understand the depths of everything that we can out of these tools is going to be really important. But getting people access to them so that they can safely use them in whatever environment they are in is the priority.
And I think overall it protects the movement that we're in as a whole. You know, the more responsible access that we can have, I believe it will keep us from having these stories about the pilot and about this and that and the third.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the pilot story, which everybody probably already knows, I mean, that was a state that didn't have legal mushrooms. We don't even know. It could have even been a synthetic. Like, there's no knowledge.
We don't know.
And it was 48 hours before the actual...
Crazy.
And he wasn't sleeping, and you know, there's a bunch of...
Yeah, it was in a deep psychological crisis.
But they blame it on mushrooms, but there's no real evidence that that was exactly what caused it. And when we're talking about something you can get from a licensed, regulated facility, and your only access threshold is, hey, just go sit down with a doctor for 15 minutes who's going to say yay or nay. Yeah. And if he says, no, I don't recommend, there's probably a good reason for it. Yeah. Maybe it's something that you need to do with your health, or maybe it's something that, you know, maybe psilocybin isn't the right, which is why we give access to all of them under the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative. So if they don't want to approve your use for psilocybin, but they think MDMA is better, or if they think that mescaline is better, you have those options.
So it sounds like
and
there's...
that doctor might say, hey, if you're a pilot, maybe you want to wait 72 hours before you fly, or a whole week.
Yeah.
Just real quick, do you think that that a medical practitioner will have to do a lot of education in the medical field? Because I think right now I hear a lot of doctors out there that are still, like even the American Psychiatric Association in Chicago said, let's wait for the FDA trials. I can't do, so there's already a mindset. So like, are you finding specific types of medical doctors, or are you going to have to do a big campaign to train medical doctors and reduce the stigma? Because it might just be like, no, right off the back as a law or whatever.
All you got to do is look at history. Same question with medical cannabis. The doctors will come. Build it and they will come. And we'll have a wide variety of doctors, but when we first started with medical cannabis, doctors would say, no, I would never do that. I would talk to one, because I started the first medical cannabis club in San Jose, and when we were the only one and the only access in the South Bay, doctors would send me AIDS patients, and I had too many stories of like, you saved my life because I can eat. But those were a few doctors who actually were like really caring for people and noticing, hey, well, this is what's going to save your life. And the same thing's going to happen. You build it and they will come. We don't have to worry about who they are yet. We have to make it so that they can safely do it, right? If we make it so they can safely say, I recommend you do psychedelics, and then you have a place to go and get safe psychedelics, and that system fuels education and fuels the stuff that we need to do on a state level to make sure everybody's safe. That's what needs to happen.
So go ahead, and then I'm coming back to you anyway.
I just want to speak to our education and engage everybody in the audience. As we get closer to the models that we feel we deserve, it's very important that we become media savvy. And you're going to see the frequency of the airplane pilot stories and the like increase. And so for everybody in the audience, it's imperative that we do our research and we find out the facts, like it was a 48-hour period between him taking the mushrooms and flying the plane, because it's up to each of us to dispel the mythologies and the distortions that media will put out in an effort to shape legislation. So that's one of the best things that each and every one of us could do, is be a citizen journalist and investigator, and also to educate those around us about the facts.
Yeah, no.
Prohibitionist hysteria, right? Yeah.
It's to your point, when everybody, or at least a lot of people know that mushrooms used to be legal in Europe. They're not legal in Holland anymore. The truffles are, but the mushroom is not. I worked in Europe when the mushrooms were legal, and the thing that made them be, I mean, it's a long story as to why they became illegal, but the long and the short of it is there was 2 or 3 stories that the press went crazy with, blamed it on mushrooms, and then Holland banned the mushroom, and then a few years later allowed the truffle. But since we're talking to you, we've talked to everybody else about their work. You've been very instrumental in what's happening in a place where most people don't associate liberal or looser laws, the Midwest. I got the fuck out of the Midwest because it's like, it's no wiggle room here, but you've been pivotal in flipping quite a few cities in Michigan. Can you talk a little bit about the state of affairs? We can talk both statewide in Michigan and more locally.
Yeah, one thing about Michigan is it's very, traditionally for the last 20, 30 years it was conservative, but there's always been a strain of like, underground resistance, for lack of a better word. Like Ann Arbor was the first city, one of the first cities in the country to legalize cannabis, and this was years ago. So riding off that momentum, Ann Arbor became the first city in Michigan to decriminalize psilocybin. And to our amazement, it was just, a lot of support from the people. So in this process, one of the things that we've learned is that the work we do in our communities, engaging each other, is very important. A case study is in Detroit, where it's a huge city, an amazing budget, if you can imagine, marketing people to come out and vote for the initiative. But for the previous 2 decades, we've been doing serious work, community gatherings, meetings, conferences, so that the general population was versed in it. The taboo had been destroyed, so that by the time it showed up on the ballot, people were like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with it, or I've had an experience with it, or it's not gonna harm me. And so that resulted in like over 60% approval, almost 60% approval.
It's crazy.
With voter initiative, with the people saying that. And that disallowed people from like watering the language down or tampering with it. It was directly from the voice of the people. So in Michigan, there are 4, going on 5 cities that are decriminalized. Most of them have been adopted by the city council who, similar here, they recognize the benefits of it. There's been very little in the way of really harassment and enforcement, but I will say the difference in Michigan is that I guess, psychedelic economy isn't as evolved. So it's still very much a people's movement, and it's not so much, big influences at the table right now. Recently in Detroit, we had an individual who started a church, and let's just say their approach was very aggressive. They were digital billboards, advertising. We sell, which is not the best way to get the endearment of the city leadership. So, of course, they ended up shutting them down. But what was interesting is that they didn't violate the decriminalization aspect of it. What they did, and this is something we can all look out for, is they said it was a nuisance. And the reason that they could justify it is because this individual didn't seed his community. He didn't engage the community. So all they needed was 4 or 5 neighbors to say, hey, this guy's a nuisance. We don't like the type of people that are coming around here. And that gave the city leverage to sticker the building and shut it down. So these are things that we have to be aware of and how cities will try to pivot around decriminalization.
Nuisance is a big one that they used in the cannabis industry a lot. That the first thing they like to do is say you're a nuisance, you're a problem to the neighborhood, which is I don't want to say why we have spots that are in fairly rough parts of the city, but we enjoy having spots that are in rougher parts of the city. One, because we know that we're helping the community in any way we can around us, but also because in San Francisco, we've had multiple overdoses. There was a stabbing at the back door. We've had to give people Narcan.
Be more specific when you say that.
Yeah.
Overdoses on what? Not the mushrooms.
Not the mushrooms. Overdoses on fentanyl.
Outside the church.
Outside the church, in the street, literally on the street the church is on. We have had there was a woman who had a fatal one the other day. One of our members saw it, like people walked past, but one of the members coming into the church is the one who went out there and got the ambulance out and tried to give her Narcan, and she was unfortunately in a coma for a little while before passing away. But that is literally happening at our door, right? So if you're trying to say that we're a nuisance, there's bigger problems. Now, there was also a bigger problem with the guy in Detroit. I know a little bit of the stuff out there. It comes to intent. Are you actually really doing the work? Is this your true faith? Is this something that you're just trying to pretend, this is a loophole so I can sell mushrooms? Or is this, like for me, it's my true understanding of how you access God and your soul. And if that is what your foundation is, going up against these battles, it's just part of the journey. But they are going to use nuisance things. We've definitely had, it's not public, but we're not hiding it either. We've had a bunch of things going back and forth with both Oakland and SF. The funniest thing in SF is a building code violation. So there's a sliding glass door to nowhere on the 2nd story. I agree that's wrong. That's not right. But I have photos from fucking Google Maps in 1997. It was exactly like that. There was a sliding glass door that just drops off into the street. But it hasn't been a problem until we moved in. And now it's a big problem, and we're going to have to... Yeah, we got to fix it, but then it's a historical building. Right? So it's like, well, you got to fix this historical building that you can't change, but you have to change because apparently if you take mushrooms, you just fly out the window. And the sliding glass door is a big problem. So when you get into like how the city and different levels of the government are going to continue to fight this, we have a playbook. We know what they're going to do. They're not inventing new tactics. It's nuisance abatement. It's threats to your landlord. It's building compliance codes. It's all the sort of things that they would use for things that were truly nuisances. Yeah. If you had a ridiculous party house where everybody was just driving drunk out of there every day and fires in the driveway and just like something like that, you would understand why the city would maybe try to fix that.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, like what we do, we make sure that our members have safe access. We try to help people around us. We provide as much information as we can. Is that the nuisance? Or is the bigger nuisance, and there's a beautiful park, a beautiful park across the street. It's a little private park, but it's known for the heroin dealers going in this little private garden and passing the stuff through the gates. So are we the nuisance, or is the beautiful park a nuisance? And I don't want it to be the nuisance. I think that there's a much bigger problem going on here.
And this real quick speaks toward a level of engagement, because I hear people say, hey, yo, how can I get involved? So like even in Detroit where we have decriminalization, similar to the cannabis thing, once we win it, now you have to sit down with ordinance. You have to engage the ordinance in your city, because now you have people who have no knowledge of these substances defining what areas are appropriate or what the building should look like. And then similar to cannabis, you get these unreasonable ordinances, and that gives them another lever to enforce.
Yeah, land use is everything. So that's that implementation, and that's going to be with with SB 1012, the really important stuff. If and when SB 1012 gets passed, and I do I do hope it does, for opening up that side of things, and we need to go further and decriminalize. It's going to be the devil's in the details, and the devil's in the creating of the regulatory framework, which is going to happen the year after that bill is passed. One thing that is sort of a funny cannabis story is, we do talk about this misapplied code enforcement, right? But when the feds came into Oakland and closed down the cannabis dispensaries in Oakland and in Berkeley, and our firm was working for some of those guys. I think I saw one in the audience today. When the feds came in and closed down, the cities realized that crime was actually increasing because people needed their medicine and they were going back to their old dealers, and suddenly there was a spike in crime, and so the city attorneys and the district attorneys in Alameda County actually went in and fought the feds to reopen the dispensaries.
Oh wow!
And so that was a bit of a win on that side, but that was a big deal.
It's funny that you guys found your way to this subject. It was my next question anyway, and it's I know in SB 1012, part of the implementation of it is, if it passes, the governor will then appoint a board, so to say, to help roll out and implement what the things look like. I'm very curious because after looking at the way that same thing happened in Colorado, everybody's up in arms. It seems like there's some conflicts of interest that are there. And so I'm kind of wondering, for people who are listening now that care about these things and want to have influence in what that rollout looks like, how can people, people say get involved. Well, how can people get involved so they can actually impact change beyond getting the thing passed?
So that board will be appointed by the governor and the head of the Health and Human Services Department, and there are a number of qualifying positions that they're looking at that are already listed in the bill. I think it's a little a law enforcement and prohibitionist heavy, but that's how that always is. They do also need have space for existing practitioners, experts, and so it's ensuring that that you're pushing or writing letters and maybe organizing around a single person or a slate of people that you'd like to see appointed, and get organizations to identify those folks, and as soon as the bill is signed, start to send letters to lobby for the folks that you'd like to see helping write those regulations.
So I think the board question is actually a good thing that we need to discuss about the Psychedelic Wellness and Healing Initiative. So what we're going to do is now that we have committed to doing it for 2026 and we're not going to make it for 2024, we're going to have a chance to refile it. So looking at what the state is doing and maybe ways we could do it better, a board makes some sense. Like, there's a good reason to have a board as long as the board's effective, right? If there's an effective group that can help drive things forward in the right direction and make decisions and do research, it can be a really good way for a law to exist around this sort of thing. But who's on the board?
And also, is that board listened to? I see a lot of really good stuff coming out of our cannabis commissions at the city level, and I don't always see the city leadership taking those recommendations.
And what power the board is given. You know, it's a little different on a city level with state laws, right? Because your cannabis board may just say, hey, well, I just want to give everybody 10 pounds of weed tomorrow. And the state's going to say, no, you can't do that. So a board can only do so much. Now, if a state board, and the law was changed to allow the state board to do stuff like that, and they wanted to give everybody 10 pounds, they could. But the city can't violate state law, so that's one of the extra complications. But in moving forward with the new initiative that we're going to file for 2026, this is going to be one of the big points of discussion is, do we need a board? Who's on the board? And what makes our community feel good while still having representations from some law enforcement? I mean, it can't be completely devoid. We need them there so they engage, right? Because if you force them to engage, they will, but if you cut them out, they won't.
One real quick thing on that too is also finding some way to put a requirement of date. We see this in Nevada, and we had decrim in the Nevada state bill, that they pulled it out. It's going to just be a study group and the same thing, and it's like the governor appointed board, and the governor's like, it's been almost a year now, 7 people still haven't been appointed to the board. Yeah. It's going to run out, and then nothing's going to happen. So now we see also that's the hip new thing, right? All states are like, we're going to do a study bill, but you guys don't have a phone. Can you call another state that's done a study bill? Like, why? It's just like it's just hollow.
So there is some things that we've learned from cannabis,
and it stalls progress.
Yeah, there is some things that we've learned from cannabis too on that. So if you're doing an initiative where there's a state board who's going to set things up, you also do a trigger and just say, look, everybody's going to do everything by this date, regardless of what the board says. So the board has this time to help guide us, and after this date, then everybody can do what we say they can do.
I think so the implementation, I'm sorry, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So the implementation is the trigger, not the board meeting together.
Right. And then the board is forced to get together because it's going to get implemented, period. So they have a deadline that they have to get together, and if they don't, then we just get everything that we want.
That's one of the good things about SB 1012. There are actually dates. You know, the
dates,
governor is required to do X, Y, Z by this date, or within this many days of the shit passing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but what Larry's saying too is they can miss those dates. What I'm saying, the date that you can only do through an initiative, really, because otherwise they can always change it. So if you do it through an initiative and say it starts on this date, period, that's what the voters have said, and it starts on that date, period. And if you're going to have a board to help guide through that process, you say, okay, well, this board has to be created, but everything starts on this date. And doing that is kind of the opposite, because you're not putting the date on the board, you're putting the date on the law, and the law starts, and whether the board gets together or not is not our problem.
Yeah, Prop 64 did have that. That was why the 2017 was probably one of the better years in cannabis.
Yeah.
Because decrim started in 2017, and then regulatory access and regulations kicked in 2018.
Yeah. So. Prop 64 is not great, but that was a very good example of this exact point.
Like and SB 58 had that too, where it was like, okay, get your board together, but they kicked decrim down an extra year. That was one of the compromises that happened, but it was going to happen. There was some discussion about whether it was going to wait on the study, and that's what we're seeing as sort of a stalling technique, where they're like, oh well, we'll do a study, and then after the study, decrim will happen. But if you put that date on there and you say this is going to happen, so get your shit together and get your study together.
It starts on this date, whether you like it or not. And that's what the voters can say. The reason why it doesn't really matter if the politicians say it is they can always change their mind. I mean, they can pass another emergency bill that extends the date forever if they want, or they could just decide not to do it and just drop the whole law. I mean, it's their law. That's why they put it forward, so that they have full control over it. When we do it from the voters, it's our law, and that's why the language is really important, because we want our law to reflect what we want.
Well, we just saw 110 pulled back though.
Yeah, 110, and then also I'm curious how you see Colorado, because that was the big stink too. Is like, hey, the voters voted on decrim in Colorado, which this is the bad tricky stuff that they do, right? So then the state legislators say, oh well, we got to put some guardrails on this, right? So they said, okay, we're going to put a meeting together, and everyone's got to, like in the community's got to get there to rah-rah to make sure they have their point in. They give them an 84-page bill 2 days before 420 when they plan the meeting, and they figure out everybody's going to be out doing 420 stuff, right? To their credit, they had like 80 to 100 people there kind of supporting the bill to make sure it didn't get changed, but they've been whittling away. Despite the fact that the voters vote on it, they like take one little notch off every couple months. And so, I mean, is there even, if the voters can't vote it in and it's still going to get changed, where is the protection in that? You say no changes to this. Like, what's the trick?
There's a couple things going on. Every state works a little differently, so what they can and they can't do is also a little dependent. But that's why the language is so important. And the problem with what was done in Colorado is, in my opinion, it was really conservative. And it left a lot of power for them to make those changes. What we really need is something strong that says, this is what we want, this is when we want it, and that is our decision as the voters of California. And I don't really want to get into different perspectives from different policy groups going forward, because there's a lot of like nitty-gritty like details that don't matter. But from my perspective, the most important thing is a law that protects what people want to do very specifically, so that there's no chance for any bullshit coming from the state. We can do this, and we can do this on this date, period.
You can also have a follow-up legislation to 1012 that gets introduced next session that says decrim, and put a date on that decrim, and that can also help force the hand of that regulatory body to get moving on it, because they're going to want to launch that when decrim launches, and I do think that would be important. I also think that the governor did say he would support decrim once there were guardrails. I think it's worth sending something to him to see whether he means that. But in 2026 we're also going to be electing a new governor, and so I think that's also something that we should all be looking at. There are, who's going to be running for governor, and how do they feel about decriminalization?
So we got like 3 minutes. I want to say one thing, and then I want to just go down the line and close out. When we're talking about setting up these boards, and having to have law enforcement on them, in my mind, I think about the police force and how they have set up these citizen review boards that have no fucking power. If we do have to put the police on any sort of advisory board, I think that we should take a page out of their book.
Look, Reggie, this is why we're friends. But absolutely, right? I mean, we need them at the table, but they aren't the ones running the show.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the difference between, if we create a board through the initiative, it's people that we trust to run the show and to do it right, versus if we leave it to the politicians. And Nara's job is to work with politicians, so she might have a little bit more opinion that things can get changed, but I don't trust those guys. Yeah. And to me, if we want something, the voters have to do it, and that's where the most power is.
So on that note, Larry, you had my last question anyway, so I'd like to ask you a last question, and then I'd like for you to tell people how they can keep up with your work and plug in. My last question for you is, you're active literally everywhere. You're on a plane to Missoula one day, you're in Lansing another day, you're in DC. If there are people in this audience from out of town, maybe a town that does not have decriminalization, they want to get active, like you said, you never went to a city council meeting before you did some huge shit. How do they either get active on their own, or how do they plug in with you to get the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, and speaking to just kind of the growth, and we just had a French team open up a little bit ago, and a UK team.
France, they got Decrim Nature, France.
Yeah, how about that, right? So, we try and make it as simple as possible. It's basically gather your community, gather a few people, keep your core team tight, people that are grinders that are kind of open to doing this stuff and taking, also can be visible. So just keep that in mind. Anyone out there, if you do have concerns around visibility, this will make you more visible. So just be aware of that. But contact us at decriminalizenature.org, and we have a whole flow chart ready to go. We have, that sound boring about it. We're trying to gamify it a little bit too, like, which team's leading which team or whatever. But really just kind of like, have it step by step. make it as easy as possible, digestible. Otherwise it's like, oh my gosh, how in the world am I going to tackle this issue? So we really make it easy. Our job is really to give you the materials, give you consultations. We meet with the city council members with you. We tell them what's going on nationally. City council members love to hear what's going on nationally, and then just connecting with everyone. So our website is decriminalizenature.org. If you want to follow us on the socials, at Decriminalize Nature on Twitter, on Instagram and Facebook, and Twitter is at decriminature, although we haven't been using that too much. So reach out to us. We'll help you out. We'll get you all started, and it's really easy. You can make it happen.
Y'all have been unbelievable, so effective and building and uplifting grassroots. It's huge. You're not coming in with this top down. You're coming in with help to set up the community that's already there, that's already ready for this, and giving them a toolkit, and that's, I think, why you've been so effective. And I just got to, as a lifelong political person, it's a really beautiful model that you guys have been
Thank you.
been doing.
Easily one of the most influential motherfuckers in psychedelics, period. Matter of fact, all these people up here made Oakland Hyphae Leaks list of the top 100 disruptors. So that's that. We got a powerhouse handle here. Yo, Mudu, same thing for you. You're moving around in Michigan. Maybe people don't live in Michigan, but they're inspired by something that you said today, and they might want to, tap in and pick your brain. I know too much picking, you won't charge them to pick, but a little bit of picking, I feel like it's all right. How can people tap in with you and get active or support your work?
Okay. One level, Decrim National, if you want to organize a local state, I guess east of the Mississippi, that's part of what I help with. If you're in the Michigan area, Detroit Psychedelic Society, reach out to us, DetroitPsychedelicSociety.org. Personally, I can be reached at Mudu Baki, MOUDOUBAQUI, on the gram. So that's it. And I also like to acknowledge Larry, because when we started the initiative in Detroit, everything from language to strategy, Decrim in general, but Larry in particular, he's a Michigander, so he was extra helpful. So I do want to acknowledge the help, and it's a movement that's top down, and we're showing people how local organizing can influence state and federal discussions, so it's a beautiful thing.
I'm going to shout out the UP. My family's from the UP.
Look at that. So before we get to Dave, Mama Ayana, will you stand up just real quick? So this woman here and this gentleman here they have influenced people beyond what I think they understand. They host in Detroit. They inspired me to host every conference I ever had, because I went to their shit in Detroit. They host the Detroit Psychedelic Conference. If you guys have not heard of it, keep your eye out. It is just a massive blessing. So Mudu and Mama Ayana right here, if y'all could just give them a round of applause and keep an eye out for the Detroit Psychedelic Conference.
Please go to it. The church is going to be sponsoring it, and we obviously support both of these people. Mama Ayana is going to be talking tomorrow. She's amazing. So if you're going to be here tomorrow, which we'll have plenty of tickets if you want to come tomorrow, please.
No, you're going to want to come tomorrow and check Mama Ayana out. Not if. Yeah. Come tomorrow and get blessed, goddammit. It's your turn, Dave.
Oh, me. You can find me. Probably if you want to get a hold of me directly, the only thing I use is Instagram at Dave Hemp. If you're trying to do high-dose work or have any questions about some of the deep experiences that you might be experiencing with high-dose mushrooms, or any questions, I'm always trying to help everybody in every way I can. So I do get overwhelmed sometimes, but please reach out if you need to, and I will do my best to get back to you. Also, the church has, so the Church of Ambrosia is the religion. Zydor is the physical church here in Oakland. The one in SF we've called Ambrosia's Door, but everybody calls it Zydor SF. So either way, you can find us. But please continue to support us. We were able to make all of this happen, and we do everything we can to give back to the community, all because people come in and support us. This is what lets us do these things. So thank you.
Thank you. And Nara, last but not least.
All right. Thanks for the invite today, Dave and Reggie, and always asking awesome questions. And thank you both for Mudu and Larry for your work too. So if you are interested in supporting SB 1012, you can. I've got a link to a Google form that's got a sample support letter. It has a fact sheet about the bill and a link to the language of the bill if you want to tear through that that long language. You can find me at Nara Dahl on Instagram and Nara Dahlbacka at LinkedIn. Yeah, I'll look at messages in both of those places, and I'll be walking out of here pretty shortly because I got to take my kid to an Easter egg hunt. So.
Yeah, and Nara just ran in right before the talk and slid through the door to be up here. So thank you so much. I also got to plug that link that we have up there. That QR code will bring you to the start of the language for 2026. This is the language that we filed this year, hoping to pull off a miracle and see it happen in 2024. But that is a Google Doc with the language in it, and it's open for people to actually make comments on it right now. So if you want to see what we're trying to do and you want to give your feedback, you can literally just go to that Google Doc and give your feedback directly into us.
And it did get a title and summary from the AG's office. And the other thing I would say is I think Dave and I are both proponents of a yes and. You can support all of these things. Yes and support your local decrim efforts. You can support a regulatory bill. You can support an initiative, whatever you feel called to support. So
it's definitely not an either or. It's a and support everybody's efforts that they're doing to try to change the law. Local is important, state is important, federal is important, county.
International.
Yeah, international. County even too. Some people forget, you got the city, the county, and then the state. So there's multiple government bodies that can be influenced, but we need to support everybody doing everything until we get things right.
Yeah, exactly. If your city sucks and your county is better, then you can go to your county and that would be enforceable in every unincorporated area of that county. And same way, if your county sucks, find a city in that county that might be more friendly.
Or a DA or a sheriff or a mayor, all those have also happened recently, So.
Well, and I know we don't have any time left, but you just hit on something that's also really important. Knowing who you're voting for is really important. Your district attorney is the one who decides to prosecute cases. The sheriff is an elected position. The city council is who determines the chief of police. If you understand who you're voting for and we get the right people in place, everything can change. And doing things at a local level, that's the easiest. When you're talking about doing things at a state level, you need a certain percentage of the registered voters in a state. You need that at a local level too, but there's some cities that you might only have 2,000 or 3,000 people. And 50% of 3,000 people is relative to what you have to get in California, it's a lot less. So
and city councils can also place stuff on the ballot.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna get my arms back around the conversation. Nara, if you guys are at all interested in understanding policy, Nara makes that shit like baby food. She chews it up and bird feeds it to you. She's very good, so talk to her. My name is Reggie, like I said. I have a bunch of different entities. Oakland Hyphae, where we do cultural things. Hyphae Labs, where we do potency testing for mushrooms, and now we're doing a bunch of other studies. Hyphae Leaks, which is our media outlet. We report on the shit that nobody else wants to talk about. You can find us at our table right out front. QR code, scan that shit and tap in. Otherwise, I thank you guys so much. Please give our panel a big round of applause. I like that. That's the best round of applause all day. Hell yeah, I like that.